I figured that I was the guy rocking in the corner of the room muttering, analog's better, analog's better. You don't know what...
You don't know what you're missing.
They'd all... Everybody went, oh, he's one of those analog guys, like, poor thing, Let's just tighten the straps on the vest a little bit more.
And welcome back to Not an Audiophile, the podcast. This is episode 22, season 2, and today we have Mark Dohmann on the line, and also Brad Serhan asking probing questions on the side. Mark answers all of my questions regarding all sorts of lesser-known aspects of turntable setup, and answers our, perhaps top 5 questions about what really matters in turntables, and of course also talks about his own turntables, the Dohmann turntable, Helix 1, Helix 2. This episode of Not an Audiophile, the podcast, is sponsored by Spectraflora. Looking for gorgeous speakers that sound as good as they look? Meet Spectraflora, Australia's newest loudspeaker innovator. Their flagship Solata 88 is handcrafted in Victoria, Australia. With patent-pending waveguide and subwoofer designs, this speaker delivers impactful, dynamic and emotionally gripping sound. Listeners rave about the beauty and breathtaking sound of the Solata 88 that makes ordinary speakers feel lifeless. Experience Spectraflora. Rediscover meaning in music. Learn more at spectraflora.com. We're talking today on Not an Audiophile to Mark Dohmann from Dohmann Turntables and Brad Serhan sitting in with some probing questions that he has to ask. So, Mark.
So, back in the 80s, 82, I put a badge on my first turntable.
Yes.
Called the Continuum.
Yep.
And it was Dohmann, same spelling as the current company name, Dohmann with the O with the umlaut.
Yep.
And we had a dream of being a turntable manufacturer, and come 1985, there was a fork in the road with the music industry. It was called the CD-ROM, and that sort of really, the massive amounts of investment in CD and getting people to convert their catalogues. It was we called it the writing on the wall.
Yeah,
And whilst it didn't lessen my passion for analog, it did sort of become sort of like a very difficult road ahead, if I could use it, and it wasn't clear. The picture wasn't clear.
No.
So, yeah, it was an interesting time. I just saw a joke recently on somebody saying that each generation was told to get rid of the prior generation's technology.
Yes, indeed.
And now the new generation is saying, let's buy vinyl and get rid of all that digital stuff. So, funny how things turn.
I have very strong memories of 2 things related to the record popularity, or 3 things if you include the fact that I was pretty glad to see the back end of it in some ways, because I lived in a house with a timber floor and I could not work out how to be able to play the system at the level that I would like without getting, acoustic feedback, etc. Which your turntable clearly would resolve, and we'll discuss that briefly in a second about your isolation system. But and then the second one was in retail, in hi-fi retail in the 90s, just how it went from, we actually at the start of the 90s were still selling quite a few turntables, but by the end of the 90s I remember distinctly having a Riga Planer 3, the last one, sitting on the shelf. It had been there for 2 years and no one had shown it the slightest bit of interest, and I think I sold it to half price at the next person that came in the door, and that was that. Until the third thing, about 2010 or 11, I got sick and tired of sending inquiries for turntables to the opposition who were stocking them. I'm like, I got to put record players back in the shop. What is going on? So in that tracking that period of lack of popularity, so what did you do in that, obviously you did something else in the late 90s because there were no one. There was not even the. I mean, I would say it was 0.0001% of the high-end market were interested in turntables in the year 2000. Would you say, or am I?
Totally. It was. We've in the industry referred to as the Dark Ages.
Yes.
And what I figured that I was the guy rocking in the corner of the room muttering. Analog's better. You don't know what
you're missing.
They'd all, he's one of those analog guys, like, poor thing, let's just tighten the straps on the vest a little bit more. So it was challenging because, I mean, it's hard to bottle up enthusiasm for something that is, a real passion. So every core conversation, somehow I managed to steer it onto the topic of why records sound better.
Are you looking for your tribe? Visit stereonet.com today to join one of the world's largest online communities for hi-fi, home cinema, headphones, and much more. Read the latest news and product reviews or check out the classifieds for the largest range of gear on sale. Membership is absolutely free, so visit stereonet.com and join up today. Can I talk to you, Mark, about your isolation system in the turntable? It's something to do with earthquakes, I believe.
Not so much earthquakes as any vibration, really. Mm-hmm. And in industry, if you've got any sensitive measuring equipment, like in a laboratory, we still deal with the university sector here and some of the other allied sectors who have very sensitive measurement equipment, i.e. a microscope, or say, for instance, they want to measure the quality of a surface with a surface roughness tester, or there's a bunch load of instruments, lasers, if they're doing any laser interferometry where they shine beams at the various angles and get the reflected energy come back and look at the interference patterns on a screen.
Yes.
They're literally the footfall in the university laboratory or engineering department, typically at the bottom of the building. The concrete transmits a lot of vibration. One would think that, hey, I'm on 3 foot thick concrete, that's going to stop anything moving, but turns out a truck on the road on the Western Highway will interfere with your imaging 2 kilometres away. 2
kilometres? Okay.
Yeah. So it's really weird. I mean, when we saw that, this was a couple of years back, somebody was doing some very sensitive measurements out west, and literally they could tell when the trucks rumbled through. Okay. You could see it disturbing the measurement gear, and they were looking at, will this mechanism that you're talking about, which is called a -K, comes from Inglewood, California.
Yeah.
Developed by a very bright individual called Dr. David Platter, and David and now Eric Runge, the senior engineer there, have been at the forefront of removing those vibration signatures from very sensitive equipment all over the world, and they use a passive mechanism. Now, in the world of vibration, there's a bunch load of alternatives. Some are what they call active, which is like a loudspeaker voice coil. And as you can see, your loudspeakers push in and out to music signal. Mm-hmm. If you invert the music signal 180 degrees, you can use the speaker to cancel out the music.
Yeah, sort of like noise cancelling headphones. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Only in a slightly different application. Yeah. But yeah.
So those systems are actively listening.
Yep.
And then they're actively feeding back a reverse signal to the incoming signal and attenuating the level of vibration that comes in. And they're very, very effective as well. And then you've got the classic air bag suspension systems where they literally get a balloon or a bicycle tire and inflate it with air, and then they bleed the air out so that the rubber eventually starts to become very compliant.
Yeah.
And by monitoring the air pressure, they can adjust the amount of bounce. And the lower the bounce, the more isolation they develop. So of all those sort of general platforms for isolating vibration, rubber mounts, oil, air systems, active voice coil-based systems or piezo devices, and then you've got your passive spring-based systems. I felt that the -K was the best performance in that. Now, when I say I felt that way, is when you ask a manufacturer for their nomograms, say, all right, show me your data, they give you some graphs and they publish the disturbing frequency, and then they show the peak acceleration and excitation mode, the resonant frequency of the device, and then a slope as it peters up to a lower amount of energy, what that curve looks like. And you have a standard test that they do that with. And it was, for my looking at things, when I looked at the active and the air and the other alternatives, it was very difficult to compare apples with apples.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the manufacturers, they wouldn't publish the same information to the same standard.
Yeah, indeed.
And so it became this exercise in converting their graphs and finding out where 0.01 of a hertz was, where 1 hertz was, where 10 hertz was, where 100 hertz was, and then looking, on the X and Y scales and saying, there it is. Now I can superimpose their graph onto this graph and see which one has actually got the better performance. And when you went through that exercise, you realised that the -K system was actually the best performance.
Okay.
It had the lowest resonant frequency. I mean, these guys can get down to 0.3 of a hertz. Now, what does that mean? In earthquake terms, you're probably shaking a little bit higher than 0.3 of a hertz.
Yeah.
So if you were to shake the system at 0.3 hertz or 0.5 hertz, it would wobble. It would excite. And you'd say, there's no isolation going on there.
Yeah.
But if you were to disturb it with a 1 hertz frequency, you already pulled out 98% of the vibration. If you disturb it with a 2 hertz frequency, you're pulling out 99.95. If you're disturbing it with, say, a 5 hertz frequency, it's completely washed off till it's infinitesimal in comparison to the original.
Yeah, so the truck that's 2 kilometres away is obviously inaudible. You couldn't. It works perfectly. No, well, I'd say but not once it's sitting on the -K though.
It washes it off.
It's gone. Yeah. So interestingly,
I just take an example. There's a university here in Australia that in the bowels of the building they have a beam collider, and they're using an airbag suspension system, and on a big girder system. And they have to ask all members of the faculty that are currently in the building and students to stand still.
Really?
Whilst they take one of their measurement shots. And once the process is over, which only takes a couple of seconds, they announce over the klaxon, hey, it's all good. Everybody can return to normal activity.
Yeah, right.
Incredible.
We're measuring things right down at the limits, at an atomic level. So in a hi-fi system in a normal home, if you can provide that level of isolation, it really benefits a turntable which is very sensitive to vibration. So that's what we've done is we've partnered with a Californian company, and to this day I still love their technology. It's still being chosen through very complex tender processes to achieve the best performance. These things are going into universities, they're going into defence, aeronautics. Amazing the amount of places where we in the biolabs where minus Ks are being put, and
for the obvious reason, if you've got to have the faculty stand still for 10 seconds, it's
believe it.
It's inconvenient.
Yeah.
Hey, interestingly, so you'd rate obviously your isolation, the minus K system, the way that you literally stop dead vibration getting into the plinth, if we call it that, of your turntable. Yeah. Well, it's obviously a key design feature, but where does that? Do you have thoughts on the opposite, which is say Rieger's, Roy Gandy's methodologies, if you like, where he goes sort of stiff and light and no suspension. Yeah. So what? Yeah. How does that? What do you have a thought on how that might? I realise different price points. Where his most expensive turntable.
He's got some very expensive tables as well.
Yeah.
And which are the ultimate expression of that engineering philosophy, which is valid, totally valid. What it is that to get a suspension system to go low enough is really hard. So typically, if you're going to run with rubber or polymer type systems, and you go open up your barrier controls, or it's now owned by another company, or your Lord catalogues, and you look through and you look across and say, there's a Paul Stradine mount. Let's look at its nomograms. Oh, crikey, that goes low. Wow, for a polymer mount getting down to 3.5 hertz.
Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive. And so you choose that rubber mount.
Yes.
All right. Now that's a horizontal and vertical, and you think that's the best performing currently on the market. Now to beat that, you have to go to an air system. So you've got to then have pumps and bladders and pressure monitoring, and then wow, I can get that down to 2 hertz. Wow, I can actually get down to 1.5. That's impressive. So you're starting to try and get down lower and lower. It's becoming more and more complex.
Yes.
So the Rieger pathway of saying, right, to solve that is such a complex task. We're going to go the other way. We're going to go stiff, and we're going to mount everything rigidly.
Yeah.
Which is a absolutely admirable approach. And if you were to excite the mechanism, we're just going to ignore that. We're not going to store that energy.
Yeah.
So it will have an effect on the sound. And so chasing the tail of trying to remove the vibration versus saying, look, we're going to live with it and we're going to adapt to its disturbing effects, and we're going to lighten our chassis system. We're going to use aerated materials, and we're going to use carbon fibre to stiffen the outside skins, but we're not going to store any of that energy because I don't want it interfering with my system. What it does is it doesn't remove the base energy.
No.
From the feedback loop, but it doesn't store.
Yes, yeah. So that's I guess the catch with making a heavier, sturdier turntable that the suspension system becomes
heavier and heavier and heavier, and
it's like it's a bit like building a more powerful car or whatever. It ends up being a Veyron and weighing over 2 tons or whatever, because everything has to be bigger and heavier to deal with the power and the heat. But your turntable, you completely you just resolve that problem by this incredible isolation system. So really, then you've got free rein over how you might make some of the other components up the top. Far as you can have a heavy platter.
I've still got the same problem that Riga is facing. Is what do you do once you get over the 100 hertz hump? I've still got exactly the same problems.
Oh, so the range of isolation is from 0.3 up to about 100. Is that?
She starts petering out, and that curve, right? So you have to look at, just like your loudspeakers and Brad's loudspeaker, that careful crafting of the crossovers to make them seamless, so that you've got a continuous path of vibration management. The -K systems take out the big, heavy bottom end energy.
Yeah.
But then what do I do with the other energies that are in the chassis? I still have to look at it like Riga looks at it.
Yes.
Or any of the other turntable designers out there look at those problems, and then I have to develop a strategy for that. And so, it's not just hey, whack a -K under a table and you're good to go.
Yeah, that's right. It's not. Yeah, you don't take a I don't know, a expensive project turntable and whack it on a -K and suddenly have a Helix 2. That doesn't work that way.
No.
Speaking of stuff with turntables, you're clearly the guy to ask.
About that.
Well, about anything, really, to do with turntables. I got a feeling that you're going to have an answer, and a balanced answer by the sound of it. So I was talking to a client the other day about turntable mats, and they had a mat. They had changed the mat on their turntable to a cork mat, and the cork mat did not have a rebated area for the label to sit.
Yep.
And it reminded me, and I suggested I felt that was probably a bad thing from a common sense point of view. So is the job of a platter mat? I have other questions. This just happens to be the one that jumped into my head. This is slightly uninteresting in a way, but a lot of platter mat people change platter mats willy nilly. It's it's a bit it's how you hot rod your turntable, right? So
yes.
Mostly they ruin the turntable. They put on some light sort of slip mat type of thing, or they put a cork mat with no rebate or whatever. Does the grooves, the ridge, the peaks of the grooves, the main face of the how am I describing this? The peaks of the grooves
and valleys.
So the peaks are suddenly not. They're not sitting on the platter mat anymore, or do we not want that? What part of the record do we want to have touching the platter mat, do you think?
Well, there's a number of ways to look at this problem. One is to look at it from perspective of, say, Ed Meitner of EMM Labs, who was one of the key developers in the SACD system, and is known for his expertise in digital. But Ed is an absolute legend in the industry, and certainly somebody that I pay attention to and respect. Ed developed a turntable where there was no mat. In fact, there was no platter.
Yeah, okay.
And he clamped the record just in the centre.
Yes.
And he had evidence to show that a free floating record, the needle still dropped down in the groove, and hopefully the record was flat and everything, and it would track that. It was the best acoustic impedance match to the stylus. So you can go from that, and it's a valid point, all the way across to a really liquid, gooey mat that tries to smudge itself up into the grooves. And with a clamp. So if you listen to both those styles, there's very broad interpretation between those 2 points. So mats definitely make a difference to the sound.
Yeah.
And are a really effective tuning mechanism. That's why, we get hold of a mat and we put it on our record player and then go, oh, wow, that sounds so much better. Valid experience, because within a person's unique system, which they're curating for their own enjoyment, and they get used to a certain sound, and there might be something about that signature in their system which they're finding, that's just a bit of a niggle there. It's not really sounding right. And changing a mat all of a sudden resolves a number of those issues.
Yeah.
So that mat then becomes the new reference,
the new
standard
hot mat.
for them.
Yeah, for them. Yeah,
the hot mat.
Tuning fork as part of it. It's a tuning fork.
Yeah, it's a tuning. Now they might then change their speakers down the track, and then there's something that didn't quite. It's missing that. I'll try another mat, and they try another mat, and it changes the sound again, and it rebalances for them their system. So there's no 100% correct answer that this is the mat and it's the only mat and it's the only way.
Okay.
It's a continuum of experience, and when you're voicing and building a turntable, you eventually settle for a type of acoustic interface, a mat or no mat, so what is that mat doing to the sound? Is it trimming the high frequencies? Is it boosting the bass? Or is it making the mid-range more prominent by tapering off either end? And so ideally you'd strive for neutrality and removing of any really annoying spotlighting signatures. So, for instance, if you had a really, really hard platter, like something that's hitting into the glass and ceramic scale, you'd possibly find a nice felt, soft, or wool or some natural material would really blend well with that mat. If you were using, say, something that has a brightening signature, you might find that a really soft, compliant rubber mat would bring it back into balance. So if you have a look at the schools of turntable-ism, as you look at the 70s and you saw the wonderful direct drives of very high quality coming out of Japan, and this is, from Panasonic to Microseki to all the Kenwoods and the Pioneers and the Yamahas, and what was the predominant type of mat that went on that turntable?
Rubber,
Rubber. And some were liquid filled and everything.
Yes, they had various. Some were quite. What's the word? Yeah, super compliant. I mean, obviously the oil leaks out of them or leaches out of them over the years, and they go hard, and that's a thing. If they're at this point it is. The aluminium platter, a fairly light, say a Japanese belt drive turntable with a relatively light aluminium platter. I mean, these are the ones that I get annoyed when someone brings one of those in with a slip mat on it that clearly weighs 1 gram, and therefore that aluminium must be ringing its head off really compared with when it has the rubber mat on it. But that ringing, it might be adding some kind of exciting illumination in the mid-range or something when you hit the right notes, So I guess it is a taste issue to some degree. So that will put that to one side.
Mark, a quick question.
Yes, Brad, fire away. Go ahead.
I have to declare my bona fides with Les Davis from Les Davis Audio, and
Yep.
Les is using a constrained layer type of material with his latest mat, which is a sort of double the thickness of the old one. Mark, you might remember calling it the Soul mat. So, and that's using constrained layer. What's your take on sort of that sort of thing with regards?
Very valid approach. Constrained layers are ways of tuning, and I know Les does a fabulous job with his sandwich constructions. So for I suppose the audience who might not be an audiophile, a constrained layer is literally a sandwich. Imagine a
bologna
loaf
sandwich.
of bread. You take a first slice and you put on a bit of butter, and then you put a bit of cheese, and you put a bit of ham, and you put some tomato, and then you put another slice of bread on top. That is actually a constrained layer. It's made of different materials, and each of the different materials create a different flavour, but combined, that sandwich is tasty.
Well, we hope that is. I mean, what sort of cheese, though, are we talking? I mean...
Yeah, well, yeah, you know... Yes, we can definitely go into the weeds on this one. But yeah, so it's constrained layers. I love constrained layers, and people who know me know that I like a sandwich. There's a lot of merit there. Again, they're very tunable devices, and you can't say that mat's going to be perfect for everybody, but definitely give them a try and find out where you're at. What are we trying to solve is that the vinyl sits on the mat, and the mat has that sandwich material or it's contiguous material, and then you've got your main platter, and that's either made of some sort of polymer or aluminium alloy or some other material, acrylic or whatever a wood. It's just totally fine to have a wood platter. So your needle excites itself in the groove by being moved left and right and up and down as the record rotates, but when it jumps from one side to the other, it gets ricocheted back and forth inside this groove, and it creates a mechanical noise, like literally banging and crashing against the side walls of the groove. If you were to envisage oneself as a tiny human being, and Brad becomes tiny person and Andrew becomes tiny person, and we all step inside the LP. So we cut a hole in the floor and we step up through and into the vinyl room. Now we've got the ceiling, which is where the needle is ricocheting and making noise, and we're in a 1 to 2 millimeter thick room.
Yeah,
it's very, very wide, and Brad walks around to the other side of the room, and Andrew and I on this side, and we say, "Hey, Brad, can you hear us?" And we hear echo.
I feel as if you and I, Mark, were on one side of the room and Brad was on the other, that the room would tip over. But I mean, it's
yeah. All right, so we can locate each other.
Maybe I'll stand in the middle and sort of,
Well, it turns out the middle is a very, very noisy area.
Okay.
Because the reflections of the sides of this round room and the ceilings and everything tend to congregate around the middle. Now, why do we know that? You can do the measurements, and some of the analog guys are now publishing those measurements for all, which is wonderful. But that problem's been around since the 1930s, when they built the record. So that understanding has been there in the industry, and the mat will dampen the amount of movement in the floor.
Okay.
So therefore, it reduces the amount of echo in that vinyl room that we're standing in.
As long as the, and this is back to my original sort of concern, is that the face of the record in many cases with many mats is not actually touching the surface of the platter mat. It's the outer lip and the inner label.
Yeah, ideally you'd want the
suspending it, if you like,
the cutting surface to be well mated to
intimate
the mat.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Ideally, but that's my opinion.
Well, to me, that makes a lot of sense, though, right? So, anyhow, look, we're going to take a 2-second break, and we will be right back with my questions on cartridge compliance and how that might relate to the specification, if you like, or the type of tone arm. So, sure. Something I'm a bit vague on. So, all right, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Brad. Back in a second. Hello. I was chatting with Jeff at Hey Now Hi-Fi this week, and I asked him, what was happening in the store. He said he had a cool bargain, really cool, that the Not an Audiophile listeners might find interesting. Lindemann Limetree Hi-Fi Essentials, German-made, compact, high-end discrete components that enhance any hi-fi system. He has a music streamer with a DAC, and a phono preamplifier, all on special. Why don't you head to heynowhifi.com.au and search Limetree to score a bargain. And we're back with Mark Dohmann from Dohmann Turntables, based in Melbourne, and these days manufactured in Melbourne. And, of course, Brad Serhan also on the line from Serhan and Swift loudspeakers made in Sydney, and myself from Delacord, made in Brisbane. We've really got all three eastern board states covered, I guess. Hence, we're on the phone and not sitting in the one room because it's 10,000 kilometres from here to Melbourne, or at least it feels like it if you drive your car. So, Mark, I've got a question about cartridge. Oh, you hear the word cartridge compliance thrown around. I mean, everyone, the specs, if you buy a new cartridge, it has a bunch of specifications, frequency response and output and perhaps, if it's a moving magnet, it might have a resistance or impedance value of the coils. It's really DC resistance, but it also have output related perhaps to speed, and also tracking force suggestions, etc. So I'm not sure that there's a compliance. I mean, just tell me what is cartridge compliance, and then how does that equate, or how should you try to match that with a particular arm? If you've got any thoughts on that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is an age-old discussion, and very, very valid. The problem has existed since the early era of vinyl. We're talking back in the 20s and 30s.
So pre-microgroove.
Pre-microgroove, the problem was there. Then in microgroove, it became more apparent. So if we come into sort of what I call recent memory, 1960s, 70s,
wow, 80s. How old are you?
All right. I'm 150 in dog years. So
I think you're older than that in dog years. Your mental arithmetic's terrible.
So the problem is for compliance. So I use an analogy of a car. So you go into, say, Zagami's, and you see this beautiful Italian Ferrari with, engine and 0 to 100 in 2.3 seconds, and all these wonderful specs.
Yes.
And you go, all right, I want to buy that car, and then you get in it and you drive it out the driveway onto the road, and there's tram lines on the road, and you feel every tiny speck of dust on the road. It comes straight through your seat, and you go, I couldn't drive to Brisbane in this thing.
No.
All right, so then you take it back and you go next door and you buy the family SUV with suspension setting of, comfort.
Yes. So
you get in it and you drive down that same tram line road and go, I can't feel a thing. But then you want to go take a corner and you you have to start turning the corner 1 kilometre ahead in the hope that you're going to make it around the corner. And you go, that's why they invented the Ferrari.
Yes.
So the suspension softness, the amount of give to an input is literally what we're talking about here. So you can have cartridges that are built like a Ferrari.
Mm-hmm.
And you can have cartridges that are built like that family SUV with the comfort setting.
Okay.
And as opposed to some cars now, you can punch a button and go to sport mode.
Yes.
You can't do that with a cartridge. It comes from the factory as either sport or comfort, or maybe in the middle.
Yep.
So moving coils and moving magnets and say the derivative moving irons and some of the the smaller variants.
Yes.
The moving magnets and moving irons tend to be built like the family SUV on comfort setting, and some are even built like an American 1950s Boulevard Cruiser, even softer than that.
Yeah, okay.
And most moving coils are up at the other end. They're at the Ferrari end.
All right.
And they're really, really... So, if you don't match the body of the car to the suspension, i.e. the tonearm, which is now sitting on that cartridge suspension, you can get a situation where the wheels won't stay on the road. They'll skip and they'll bounce, and the whole car leaves the road for that split second before it bounces down again.
Mm-hmm.
You need to put a bit of luggage in it. You need to have a bit of weight of an engine. You need the weight of the passengers, etc., to get it to sit about the middle of its suspension travel. Correspondingly, in the family SUV, you load too many cement bags from Bunnings and you put a boat on the roof and, 4 adults in it and everything, and all of a sudden she's bogged down so low it starts bumping the suspension.
Yeah, okay. Yep.
Against the stops, which makes for... So you've got to balance the amount of mass that you're moving for the cartridge suspension. That's where this argument comes into play. Now, the common understanding, which has been around, say, 50 years, is a formula which gives you a number, and that's the rule. And you've got to stick by that rule, and you plot your graph. Yeah. You say, for that cartridge, you need to buy this tonearm. So that is a theory, and it became dogma.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
You could light up a few internet forums.
That's never happened in the hi-fi business. There's no, surely.
So sometimes you found a designer who went against dogma.
Right.
And everybody would look at them and go, oh, that person is wrong. They are wrong because the formula says the following.
Yes.
And then you'd go and listen to that iconoclastic designer's work.
Dogma-free work, yes.
Wow, that sounds amazing. But what you found was some of those innovative designers didn't publish their figures because they knew it would light up the formula guys.
Yeah.
That would say, oh, you're wrong, you're breaking the law, the law says. So what they did is they underdeclared the mass of their tonearms.
Okay.
Tucked it away, were impacific about it, you can't see, where's the effective mass? I can't find the effective mass of this tonearm. It's never published. Well, you'd weigh the thing and it'd be sitting up at 40 plus, 60 grams.
Right.
Complete and utter heresy.
Yes.
But you'd match it with a Koetsu cartridge, a moving coil, and go, wow, that sounds absolutely amazing.
Okay, so the Koetsu is the Ferrari. It's got Ferrari suspension in it. Is that? Yep. Yeah. And the heavier
Ferrari, like compared to an MB with a Shaw V15 Type 5, which is the family SUV.
Yes.
Soft suspension.
So you've got your Ferrari cartridge, your Koetsu collectible Japanese handmade cartridge, and what you want with that is a lighter effective mass arm? Is that what you want? The opposite.
You want a heavier.
Yep.
Arm.
So you're saying 60 grams is light then, as far as effective?
No, not light. That's a heavy arm in the overall schemes. But
in the overall scheme,
normally, the rule says you don't go above 20. You see.
Oh.
And
okay.
and these guys like the FR64s from Fidelity Research.
Yes.
And, some of the big Sumikos and some of the Glands and those venerable the Ikedas and so on, they were heavy. See?
Yep.
And they matched well with the Japanese moving coil school, which is, the high end is becoming a dominant mode. Like the moving coil is still very, very, very popular amongst the guys who are pushing analog performance. So you need a heavier arm than what's accepted. So if we were to calculate and measure the acceleration at the head shell versus the excursion at the head shell, and mechanical engineers would do those sorts of things, you might find that those old calculations, the rules, don't apply.
Okay.
And you're actually observing the system under test, the SUT, or device under test, DUT, and you're measuring something completely different than what the formula from the 1950s said is the rule. So observed results, real-world results, are actually the only thing that matters. So you can throw out that old formula.
So, and in turn, while you're throwing it out, you could throw any cartridge on any arm and have a listen to it and see what you think. Is that the gist of it?
Oh, look, that's one way of doing it. Or you can, there's a gentleman who I have a lot of respect for, Alexei from Korf Audio, that's KORF audio.com. And Alexei has finally published things that we've been secretly doing for a number of years.
Okay.
It's now out in the open, and he provides a wonderful little calculator, and you punch in some values and you push calculate, and it gets you a predicted mode.
Yeah.
And it shows you the importance of those, and it basically proves that you can run a much heavier arm than previously thought acceptable.
Okay.
Now, imagine a marketing comes through from one school of engineering, and in turntables we're talking, and tone arms, and we're matching a Shaw V15 Type 5, which back in 1970 was the bomb, and we needed super lightweight tone arm to match it so that its very compliant suspension would work beautifully in the groove and track impossible amplitudes.
Yep.
Like it was the proof that this is the superior way of engineering. That tone arm that it was mated to, built by a British company called SME, was an absolute work of art, like in fine mechanical engineering and lightweight technology.
Indeed.
And made it with that cartridge. Wow. Okay. So now that became the accepted understanding in a lot of people's mind when they went to a hi-fi shop. They saw these lightweight performance systems, and it became embedded that tone arms have to be light. And if your tone arm looked heavy, it wasn't as good as the one that was light.
Okay.
Now, if you can imagine that took hold
yes,
in the consciousness, whereas in the real world, if you're running a moving coil now, the Frank Kuzma Sapphire tone arm is pushing up at 60 grams. Other arms are pushing up to 90 grams, and we start an argument, and then we have to answer the questions. It's okay to do that, because if the record is flat, which, it's not always the case, but with
our aforementioned record mat and clamp, it is, and it's not warped,
pretty
it's
flat.
Pretty flat.
Yeah, it doesn't become a problem.
Okay.
So the actual problem that we were trying to solve, which was what we called an 8 to 12 hertz issue, we were trying to get the thing to resonate between those two bands because it was above warp, wow, and it was below music frequency, and that was the sweet spot that we had to sit the resonant system into.
Yep.
It's quite okay to push that down, drop it down to 5, 4 round there with a super heavy, and the music still plays.
Yeah. Speaking of, a room that I quite enjoyed at Munich last year. I don't know whether you were probably too busy. Assuming you were there, and I'm sure you were.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
You would have been busy working, but I was just flitting around, entertaining myself, and so there was a room, very nice room, which I mentioned in another episode. Rooms, great sound we heard. I was the wrap-up episode of 2024 where we're talking about the best sound we heard all year. Best sound I heard was these amazing a cappella speakers, which are sort of a giant wave-guided horn, but they're very
plasma tweeter,
short, stumpy. You obviously know more about them than I do. I know how they sound. They sound freaking amazing. But the turntable the guy was using had a tone arm about 3 feet long. Well, at least it looked like that from because it's a big room that it was set up in, and I did walk up to the turntable and take a nice picture of it, which we should put on the website. But the point is, let's say it was 2 foot. We'll speak in metric. Say 700 or 800 mil long. So what's your thought? Was the effective mass of that by definition is high, or what's going? And what's the advantage in a 3 foot arm?
Yeah. Okay. Well, the advantage what they're trying to solve there is they're trying to create the most linear path. See, the record was originally theoretically cut in a straight line.
Yeah.
And it's a horizontal lathe, and the cutting head is on a linear track, and one would assume that the engineer who cut the record made sure that the line of the cut was from the outside edge directly to the center of the spindle.
Indeed, yeah.
If we assume that that is the truth, on that basis, and I'll explain a little bit why that sometimes isn't the case. Sometimes the engineers are a bit sloppy and they cut it 2 or 3 millimeters ahead or behind of that ideal path.
Okay.
So, as an average, we're going to get somewhere near the middle. If we make a really long tone arm, just say we make it 3 meters long tone arm.
Wow, no, that's the thing I'd like to see.
All right, and you've got 3 meters away, you've got the pivot point, and then 3 meters forward of that, you've got the stylus. The arc that 3 meter long tone arm would deliver is almost a straight line.
So that's is that what they're? So it's a geometrical alignment.
They're trying they're trying to reduce. Now, with a head shell, most people when they look at a turntable, they'll see a pivoted tone arm, and then the where the needle is sort of kicked off to the left. So it's sort of now what they're doing there is they're trying to get 2 points on the arc where that it is actually square to a straight line, perpendicular to a straight line. Now, those are what we call null points, and the null points can vary a little bit around 60 millimeters and around about 108 millimeters from the center of the spindle.
Okay.
So there's 2 null points. Now, you can play with those a little bit by offset of that angle and length of the tone arm.
Yep.
So the effective mass we know is not a problem anymore because you can have a heavier cartridge. So having a 3 foot long or 800mm long tone arm is quite acceptable from an effective mass point of view.
How, to cut you off for a sec, effective mass, obviously it's counterbalanced, you're still tracking it at 1.5 or 2 grams or whatever, but so the effective mass, I mean, if 800mm long arm is going to have to be made out of titanium or something to keep the effective mass low, or you could make it out of a broomstick.
They typically make them out of violin bows, or those sorts of things that they can tension up over that distance.
Yeah.
Because we've got a thing called Young's modulus.
Yep.
So if you get a ruler, like a metal ruler, say a meter metal ruler, and you put it on your kitchen bench, and then you start pushing it out over the kitchen bench, eventually you'll see the ruler start to droop. The further you push it out.
Sure.
That's a point where the material's weight versus the material's stiffness starts to interact, and the weight overcomes the stiffness to varying degrees.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
So in an ideal world, it would be infinitely stiff, and be infinitely light, but we can't have that. So we've got to compromise it somewhere along the rules of the materials science, or the structure, like building a bridge across the harbour, is dealing with that problem. Okay, so the 800mm long tone arm. The only issue is your partner's acceptance of the device in the house.
So actually, that's so clearly, you won't be buying one of those.
It's the limiting factor.
But for those that live by themselves, they could potentially have quite a long tone arm, and there would be a small advantage in alignment. But and so speaking of alignment, if you've got a more normal length arm, which apparently average is 6 inches. No, that's sorry, 9 inches.
9. Yeah, there's some shorter than that.
I was some shorter than 6. But getting back to tone arms, so the point is,
dream of 12. So
yeah.
In relation to everything. Sorry, I'm just having
no.
a quick
There was
drink.
no double entendre there.
No, because this is serious. It's a very serious discussion about tone arms. So let's say you've got your standard 9-inch arm. When you're aligning a cartridge, what do you aim for? I've heard rumour and maybe some innuendo that you should really align it for the inner node, or for perfect alignment on the last track. Is that a thing? Because that's where alignment irregularities potentially, I guess, are at their highest, which from what you were suggesting about the way the record's been cut would in fact be the case, because if the engineer has messed up slightly and is not aiming at the spindle, that would be those
alignments.
There'd be a bigger misalignment at
on
that
a straight
point.
line. Correct. So all those alignments are predicated on a perfect world where the tangential cut is actually right through the center of the spindle. So we can't do anything about that. That's the material that's been handed to us. So we're aligning for a bell curve, the average. And within those alignments, there's some 1930s alignments, and then there's some 1960s alignments, and there's some sort of late 90s, early 2000s alignments. And what we mean by that is that how much forward of the tangential line, what we call the overhang, and how much offset, how many degrees offset, will define where you hit those tangent points. And some people who like listening to long classical pieces find that the records got a lot of information towards the label. And it's typically where the orchestral crescendo and the whole story comes together, and
they're going off.
You want the ultimate sonics there. We'll use alignments that favour that last little bit to try and reduce the very steeply escalating distortion figures towards the end of the record.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Now, others who listen to more contemporary, modern, indie, that sort of stuff, and want lower distortion across the maximal surface of the area, knowing that the records often don't get cut deep into the label direction, they want to reduce the distortion figures at the start and in the middle more. So you choose your alignments based on the predominant listening styles. If you're listening to classical and punk and everything like that, you're probably going to go for an average somewhere. So the four are Beerwald, Lofgren, which were contemporaries back in the 1930s. They did some maths. And then we've got a Stevenson, which was out of the UK, very, very favourable towards more of the classical longer cuts. And then we've got a Unidin out of Germany, which again is a valid alignment. Now, no one is perfect. They're all trying to reduce distortions that are inherent in the mechanism. So choose your favourite and stick with it. To fiddle with it between records is
not practical. No.
So that then means what tools do you use to do the alignments? And I'm a favour of what I call metrology based.
Oh, hang on, just bear with us a second, Mark. The line has gone very choppy, which is kind of frustrating. Just run
clear here.
Yeah, okay. Just wind back one or two sentences, and you were about to talk about alignment gauges, I think.
No,
it's clean again.
Alignment,
it's good.
Yeah, alignment gauges. It's as simple as you can print them off the internet on a 1-to-1 ratio on your inkjet printer at home. Poke a hole in the label area and stick the template on and align the cartridge. It's really simple. As you progress through learning the various geometries, you can invest in more serious tools. Some of those tools include protractors that mount onto the platter and have little grid lines on them, and they've got extension arms that you locate over the rear pivot of the tonearm, and you have to build that system up, and they're again precise tools. In that world, I really like the arc protractor style, purely because it means that I'm travelling a lot, and I can carry those tools with me relatively easily because they're flat and they don't require any identification of the rear of the pivot, because the arc protractor is just literally an arc that's scribed on a mirrored surface, and if you touch down the needle at the front of the arc and move the tonearm to the inside of the arc and it touches down at the same point, you automatically define the rear pivot. It's just automatically defined in the triangle.
Yes,
so it's just a way of reducing complexity and increasing the quality of the measurement. So for me, arc protractors are an excellent tool. I also love using the more complex tools such as Smart Tractor and so on, that comes out of Germany, and the Ficet tractor, and there's a bunch of them there that are just like jewellery. You open the box,
little
a beautiful array of alignment tools, and they're also excellent. But for me, being on the go and having to set up turntables at shows, etc., I just run the arc protractor system from Wally Tools, and that's just a personal preference. I was good friends with Wally, the originator, and I'm now great friends with J.R. Boyclair of Wally Tools, who's making those tools. So for me,
Does the job.
Very,
and relatively simple. So when you tighten up the screws, and because you've got your alignment right, do you are you a believer in doing them up with a, to continue the 3-foot theme, a 3-foot long spanner? Do them up to 200 foot-pound, or are you you just nip them up kind of thing, or is there anything in that? There was a fad for a while.
Ideally, you should be able to, and then they're not inexpensive, but a small torque, calibrated torque driver.
Yes.
So that you can create a setting, and you can reach that setting perfectly every time. Okay. That's the ultimate expression. Yep. If, however, you're on the go and somebody says, "Oh, can you just have a look at my cartridge and can you realign it for me?" and you say, "Have you got any Allen keys or you've got a screwdriver handy?" You're left without that tool, and you have to do it. So my advice is, you don't use the long part of the Allen key. You use the short part as the torque.
Yes.
Settings, and you just gently tighten. You don't put your wrist into it or your elbow.
Yeah. So just tight.
Yeah. And now I have had examples of galvanic bonding occurring between cartridge screws and cartridge bodies in humid tropical environments.
Yeah.
And one thing I could advise is in those sorts of environments, use some sort of an oil agent, something that retains itself on the screw.
Yep.
Just before you assemble, and not that it drips everywhere, but just gentle. No. Causes a film to reduce the amount of potential for welding to occur, because you're thinking not of yourself but thinking of the next person who's going to change the cartridge out.
Yes, yeah.
That's the only thing. Don't over tighten, and try to match your materials so that they're not too disparate on the galvanic scale.
Do you lead out cables? And I don't want to talk cables because you manufacture turntables, but you must supply, I presume you supply a lead with your turntable. Do you feel, the vast majority of turntables at the semi-affordable end of the market have fairly rudimentary cables. Is there much in it? In the case of a moving coil, it's a tiny...
audio or the power?
The audio. So a tiny... we're talking, obviously, a tiny amount of signal from a moving coil cartridge. Mm-hmm. So one would think the lead was important. Is that...
it's critical, absolutely critical, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why. So it's not uncommon to find multiple junctions of joints within a tonearm wiring system.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still very popular to provide what we call a DIN connector. It's 5 little pins in an array.
In the bottom of the arm, in the stub or whatever?
The phono standard.
Yeah.
All right, so there's many standards in the DIN world.
Yes.
But the one for phono is a particular type.
Yeah, okay.
And they usually allow the end user to purchase and interchange different tonearm wires and just plug it up into the underside of the tonearm. It's got a great convenience factor. I'm not against that, because it solves a lot of problems. It provides a lot of convenience, and it still sounds great. However, if I'm building for ultimate, like trying to push the tech as far as I can get it,
sure,
then I know I can't easily overcome the cartridge clip interface, which is a clip onto the pins of the cartridge.
Yep.
Because it's quite difficult to solder, or for our American friends, solder, the
harsh Harsh but accurate.
The pins onto the but it has been done.
I was going to say, is that a thing? Because it sometimes occurs to me, you could give them a bit of a clean up and you could tin them pretty quickly. But have you ever soldered the head shell wires to the cartridge?
Guilty as charged.
Okay,
but it's
a revelation.
Well, it does improve it, but it's not advised. It's definitely not convenient. And you can actually wreck the cartridge because you put too much heat into the pin, you'll melt the other side of the pin off.
This is my concern, is that it disconnects itself internally.
Highly not recommended.
Yeah, okay.
So the better thing is to try and simulate that connection. Now, again, we've taken the little pill and we've shrunk down the mini persons. So Mini Brad, Mini Andrew, Mini Mark are standing there looking at the cartridge pin and the cartridge clip. And Brad says to me, Mark, that's as rough as can be. It looks like craters are on that beautiful shiny surface that we just saw a second ago. Wow, I couldn't believe how rough that surface is.
Yeah.
And I say, hey, Brad, have a look inside the cartridge clip. And we both look into the cartridge clip and horror of horrors, it's just as rough. Now, when we push those two surfaces together, there will be times when the peaks touch.
Yes.
And the valleys don't. And the valley to valley in these little craters is a small area for an electrical potential to jump across and make a contact that is intermittent.
Okay.
Micro arcing.
Bloody hell.
And if we were working for a company that was trying to separate noise from data, or noise from any signal, that micro arcing is actually a distortion artifact that they want to remove. So contact enhancers are typically a gel-like substance, like Dow Corning DC4 or one of those sort of greases, conductive grease.
Yes, yeah.
And you put a bit of that between those two surfaces and you reduce that arcing.
Okay.
And in super, pushing the envelope systems, you can hear the difference. Correspondingly, at the other end, if you've got a DIN connector halfway through the arm or you've got multiple connections through the arm, that problem just keeps recurring. So in the ultimate sense, you only want the cartridge clips, and then you either solder the wires directly onto the amplifier, which again is inconvenient, or
I haven't seen that.
No, but it's obsessive. You know what I mean? Like going to the next best thing. What's the next best thing? What's the next best thing?
Of course,
the next best is contact enhancer on a really high quality RCA or XLR pin. Then the metallurgy of the pin, and the thickness of the plating, and the blah 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 blah.
Any thoughts on the cable itself that runs from the DIN connector at the base of the arm to the preamp?
Yeah. So I've over many years played around with lots and lots of different cables. Now, most of the time, the tonearm manufacturer will have done that work and say, we recommend the following.
Yeah.
So, for instance, on the Reed tonearms, they've got a silver option, which is beautifully done, and that sounds better than the copper option.
Okay.
In some cases, a copper construct will outperform the silver sonically.
Yep.
So it's really, and I know for the listeners it'd be difficult to say, well, Mark's not actually, putting a stake in the ground here. It's just, well, I can't. It's because it is case dependent.
Yeah, I was going to say not just case dependent, but the case of the cable, I guess. Is it? Talking with Matthew Bond on a couple of occasions in other episodes, he seems to be as much concerned, if not more so, with the dielectric than and the materials that's made from. Is that
so? For instance, the Frank Schroeder uses a natural wool fibre, almost like a cotton wool, but it's wool.
Yeah.
And he gently lays the wires in that fluffy matrix.
Yes.
Down the middle of the tone arm because of the effects of plastic dielectrics that he's trying to avoid.
Yeah, okay.
So the tone arm designers, the guys, they really do their homework on that. Others just buy a 10-kilometre reel and pull it off the reel, clip it, and away you go.
Yes.
Still works, all right. But for the guys who are really pushing the high end, you'll often find they've gone to incredible lengths to source and specify the internal tone arm wiring and the array.
Okay. Complicated. Hey, we're sort of getting towards the shank of the conversation. I'm interested to hear your top 5 observations, I suppose, from so many years of playing with turntables. What are the top 5 things that you think affect the sound the most? And I guess we've covered perhaps some of those. I mean, obviously the cartridge plays a big role in the character of the sound, but where do you sort of... The systems that I'm interested in is sort of turntable itself versus the tone arm versus the cartridge versus the lead versus the whatever. Do you have do you have an order of concern? For instance, would you buy your turntable and put a Riga RB330 on it and get a substantially better result than you would if you stuck it on a P3? Which I guess you would, right?
Yeah.
But
I can. If you come to Melbourne, I can take you to a listener who has done exactly that.
Oh, okay.
RB300 on a Helix 2.
Yeah.
And that rig is getting hammered day in, day out, from morning till after dinner. It's in a family area where the kitchen and communal meals are shared, and there's vinyl spinning all day, every day.
Yeah.
And the project commission was, I want an arm that anybody can come here and play a record with, and I don't want to ruin my records, but I want it to sound great.
Yeah, okay.
And, that's pretty much bulletproof tone arm solution. Nice moving coil on it, and it fits in a beautifully decorated room, so aesthetically it was matching and everything. The system's quite discreet, small integrated amplifier from Creek Audio, believe it or not.
Okay. Another popular guest on the show, Mike Creek. You're insinuating that the turntable is by far the most important component as far as sound quality in the system.
Look, you have to give each component its own space. The turntable is trying to get out of the way, and deliver, signature-free conditions for the arm to perform. Now, the Riga RB300 is no slouch. It's a great tone arm.
Yep.
And you can hot rod them, with wiring and blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
Different counterweights and they can handle a big moving coil as well. There's no issue.
Okay.
They lack some of those fine adjustment features, azimuth and, easily done on so on and BTA on the fly and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So you choose them for their
elegant simplicity.
Yeah. Now, on the turntable side, one of the signatures that comes through a lot of tables is bass feedback.
Okay.
So you've got your speakers, booming away. You're listening to some lovely music that's generating a lot of bottom end. And if you remove that feedback through isolation, it cleans the bass up where you start to hear articulation and the instrument's intent and the musician's intent from playing bass, because, it's an absolute foundation of the music. So isolation for me is a must-have because of its impact on cleaning up the bottom end. Now, you can have a beautiful bottom end warmth and a thickness and a fullness, which is actually that signature of bass feedback, without it being uncomfortable. Right?
Yeah.
It can be pleasant.
Yes, a pleasant coloration, I guess.
Yeah, if you're trying to compare it to the original tape or master tape, then you go, hang on, it's not on the tape, so why should it be on my record?
Yes.
So that's, for me, a foundational aspect. There's a thing called, in turntablism, they talk about Pratt, pace, rhythm, and timing. And it's hard to describe, but basically it's the ability for you to snap your fingers and tap your toes to the music, because the intent of the musician is conveyed.
Yes.
And some systems wash a lot of that off and leave you with a beautifully smoothed, or a tonally homogenized rendition.
Amorphous mass of bass.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. Whereas other systems make you all of a sudden stop talking and pay attention to the musician, because you go, wow, what's he doing there?
Yes.
So Pratt for me is since mucking around with the old idler drives in my youth, there was a company out of Tasmania called Commonwealth Turntables, or Commonwealth Electronics, and in the 50s through to the early 60s, they were building transcription level radio station quality works of art.
Yeah.
And in the late 70s, early 80s, they were throwing them out onto the nature strip. Young audiophiles who couldn't afford the expensive Lynn Sondek would find these old pieces of junk and lovingly restore them and go, wow, this sounds amazing. And Pratt, since that day, has sort of been imprinted on my ear.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is a very important thing for the turntable design to achieve that.
And Mark, I was going to ask some questions, which is sort of deviating from what Andrew was saying about 5 points, but back in the 70s, 80s, when I was playing around with turntables, I had the old Technics SL23. I think that was a belt drive, actually, but there's quite a few Technics with direct drive. Then I had had the old AR turntable because I was getting feedback or howl around from the Technics.
Yeah.
The AR turntable had the suspension system.
Suspension.
Then went to funnily enough to a Riga 3, but that was isolated on the wall to some extent, and then to a Lynn Sondek. I'm mentioning all these is because and I also had an Orpheus turntable. Which you probably, and I was designed in Melbourne, and it was an idler rim. So
Orpheus is great. Yeah.
And I unfortunately let that go. It ended up being how I sort of came up with the brand Orpheus loudspeakers, but that's beside the point. I unfortunately let that go, but the sort of covering all those, so the idler rim had advantages in the bass end. Is that what you're contending?
Well, it had it was like the direct drive of the era. There were some direct drives in industry, but these were fast startup, high torque. So when the needle was in the groove and a large modulation came along, the effect of that modulation wouldn't create drag.
Yes. Yeah.
That would affect the way the platter slowed down and sped up. Just had enough oomph to push through any modulation, thus delivering the full impact of the music signal. And
scale and dynamics.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was a direct coupling of the motor to the platter.
Right. So there was noise coming through. Was that a problem? Would that be
one of the issues that they suffered from was rumble and motor noise coming through, and you put up with that because of the great dynamics and slam and punch and
right
and
the Pratt?
expressiveness. Yeah, the Pratt.
So
I had a gentleman who's an absolute legend in the industry, and is one of the most knowledgeable people on idler systems, Robin Wyatt from the US, and Robin came to a show and listened to the Helix, and he said, "Mark, I'd swear this was a rim drive. This turntable was the only belt drive that I've heard Pratt out of."
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And that compliment from Robin, made my day.
You'd be cock a hoop.
Yeah, because that's what we strive for, and you do that with high torque.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's a trick and a short belt length, and those sorts of things that we're trying to emulate what a rim does.
Yeah.
But without conveying the noise of that motor into the system, so we decouple. Using various tricks, which is that mechanical area after 100 hertz.
Yeah, yes, right. The thing is, just veering off a little bit, is that back in the 70s and 80s, the question I was going to ask you was, when did people start to judge turntables subjectively? Because there was that sort of around the late 70s, if I remember rightly. People were sort of just that used to measure the wow and flutter and rumble, and that was basically it. And you'd be judging the sound of a turntable by maybe the combination of the tonearm and the cartridge. But when did that? I remember the English magazines, I think, were starting to sort of talk about it when Lynn started to come to the fore, or their marketing did. And there's a lot of talk about Pratt with the Lynn.
Yeah.
It was. Did you? I don't want to make you walk the plank, but did Lynn actually have, from your point of view, that sort of Pratt?
Look, I put my hand up. I've loved Lynn's since the first day I heard them. I had a lecturer at uni who was an owner, and of course audiophiles identify each other pretty quickly,
Yep.
And I said, well, oh wow, you got one of those, and he said, yeah, come over and have a listen, bring your mates. And so we went over and had a listen one time, and that was through some audio research, amplification, and 18-inch Hartley monitors in an open baffle concrete baffle. It was true audiophile, and the Lynn Sondek with the moving coil and heavy arm FR64, and I just sat there and went, wow. Now, the Lynn's mid-range for me is still an absolutely lovely sound. The extension down the bottom and the extension at the top, that's where we've really worked hard to get more.
Right.
But yeah, to this day, if somebody's running a Lynn, they're happy campers. They're making good music.
They're fun.
Yeah. And look, the whole idea of a Lynn is that you've got it for life. And I've really, and even I should speak about the Dohmann team. It's not only me. We've also embraced that it's a turntable for life, and you've got an upgrade path through life to always keep you at the latest iteration. So yeah, it's a lot to be. We have a lot to thank Lynn for being pioneers in the industry.
Right. But you would have been. When did you start to? Well, one last question, and going back in.
I started building turntables because I couldn't afford a Lynn.
Right. Okay, and that was around 82, as you said. And
I was before then.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. No,
but were you obviously? The question I'm going to ask is: were you aware of the differences in sound due to materials you used, for the chassis, etc.? Were you subjectively evaluating it?
Yeah. That came about because I heard the source first, and marvelled at it. And then somebody else had an RD11S, and then somebody else had a Microsecchi, and all of a sudden, as I'm starting to hear these better examples of tables, that all of a sudden changed, my approach to analysing what they were, then hunting around, finding parts and building the first couple of iterations. And then all of a sudden I had a turntable that I'd built, and then the hi-fi store that I was frequenting kept on saying, why don't you buy a decent turntable? And no, I'm happy with what I got, or what is it that you've got? Oh, I made it myself. And they'd all giggle and had a laugh, and oh yeah, another one of these DIYs. And then finally one of them said, well, why don't you bring it in, let's have a shootout. A shootout.
Guns drawn. Oh, yeah.
And, like a Western.
Yeah.
I did, and they heard what I heard, and then that store said, can you build more? And that was the start of Dohmann.
Wow.
Bloody
Okay.
hell. I like the way you said, they heard what I heard. I love the way you played that then, Mark.
So, that's literally what happened. Yeah, it's still clear in my mind. That was, and that's not me being a smart aleck or anything. It's just I had the might of a large Australian Airlines engineering division behind me. It wasn't fair, like I didn't play fair. There was some serious materials monkeying around that went into the first of them.
Oh, right.
And, but that again taught me a lot about what each element. It's a whack-a-mole game. Fix one thing one side, something else pops up at another. So it's actually way more complex than even today I'm still learning. It's a complex beast.
And the more you know, the less you know, Zella.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
We'll take a 2-second break, guys, and we'll come back, and Mark will wrap up this order of importance, top 5 suggestions. Back in a sec. Sirhan Swift, bespoke loudspeakers designed and built in Australia by perfectionists. Described by reviewers as exceptional. Sirhan Swift has received numerous awards here and abroad, including Sound and Image, Best Stand Mount Loudspeaker 2024. For full information, head to sirhanswift.com. We're here with Mark Dohmann and Brad Sirhan, otherwise known as Brad Sirloin, Master of Ceremonies and Speaker Design at Sirhan & Swift. Free ad there.
Thank you very much, Hutch.
And of course, Mark is the figurehead and the founder of Dohmann Turntables, but as he alluded to, there is a team of people, so he's not going to take all of the acclaim for their amazing sounding machine. And you were talking about isolation and Pratt and how the two are sort of connected. I remember a demo you did at the Melbourne show, not last year, but the year before. You had the turntable running into some enormous amplification and a giant pair of Wilson Benesch loudspeakers, and you were playing it very, very loud, and I could not believe how well the thing was tracking. It was so tight and clean that there had to be a tape machine, or something hiding away, but I was pretty sure that that the stylus was in the groove, and in turn the record that we were listening to was coming, was the record that was on the turntable. It just I've never heard anything like that. I mean, if that's what the Helix does, then that's very unusual, I think, in a turntable, and I guess that's to some degree down to that minus K isolation system. But getting back to the other, so you've alluded in my quest to steal information from your head. Well, you implied by the client that you've got with the RB300 arm, but a moving coil cartridge, that perhaps the arm is perhaps less important than the cartridge. And obviously, we're saying the turntable.
No.
Is that a leading question?
I mean, I'm going to clarify. Arm is absolutely crucial, and the science behind arms is still, to this day, a hotbed of innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And, for instance, there's arms that are, as expensive as my turntable, that customers are mating with the turntable. So
Yes.
they spend, $100,000 on the turntable,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll put $100,000 into the arm.
Okay, and then what cartridge would they be bolting? That becomes a personal taste issue, or
yeah, they're typically predominantly moving coils, and they're predominantly, diamond cantilever, and complex body, assemblies,
Yeah.
platinum magnets, and they're really at the leading edge. Now, they're also European and Japanese. They're the predominant two centres of manufacture of those high-end moving coils.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that you can't fit a optical cartridge or as expensive a moving iron or moving magnet. The arm, however, is a very critical part of the equation. So you can start from an RB300, but you will hear the difference between that and something like an Origin Live, which you can scale up through. You can go up into the carbon fibre constructs. You can go to the science, into the Wilson-Benesch geometry, GMT, tonearm technology, which is absolutely first class. Most modern thinking and technologies applied, as well as listening to the super precision SAT technology out of Swedish analogue technologies, or some people go vintage FR rebuilds. By you have to find a really competent person to rebuild the tonearm if you're going vintage rebuilds. But you can buy new not EAT, which is a good brand. Brand new Ikeda and brand new glands, which are that S-shaped, what I call classical 70s Japanese school.
Yep.
They are sometimes on the most expensive rigs. Yeah.
So you've got your $100,000 turntable, you've got your $100,000 arm, you have your $26,000 cartridge. Do you or do you not clean the record?
If the record is dirty, and a lot of us buy secondhand, and we go crate diving and so on, and the music is so important, and it's only limited access to that, you take that record and you run it through, cleaning routines, ultrasonic machines, and it's amazing what those machines can do to resurrect poorly cared for vinyl, and it makes it listenable. Brand new records, some of them need a clean because they're full of mold release and from the pressing, and you can.
That's the concern, isn't it? Yeah, there's real nasty crud building up on your very expensive stylus. So I guess that's a concern. But we're talking about Linz earlier, and there's and I of course was at school this particular day when Ivor was out at a hi-fi show telling people not to clean their records and let the stylus clean the record. But that's the old tale of yore that he used to tell people. Is that just a great bit of simplistic marketing?
No, look, you can make a mess if you clean the record the wrong way.
Yeah,
you can create more problems than you're setting out to solve. So I do see the reason why he would have said those things. If a record is cleaned and it's in good nick, then just a light brush, get the main dust boogers off before play helps, and you shouldn't have an accumulation of anything around the stylus after that that play.
Yep.
A lot of records we buy, they had, people put, I've heard apocryphal stories of people using boot polish to make them shinier.
What?
You don't know what's been done to it before you got it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, you'd want to. I would have thought that's where your two arm model. You could have the second-hand record arm and cartridge. It's not so much a different arm for different whatever. A 78 or whatever, a mono cartridge.
Yeah, so you don't put hours on your
good one.
Most expensive. Yeah.
Any thoughts on cleaning the stylus? And I had a final question, but yeah, we'll talk about cleaning stylus as well. I mean, it's hard to buy a decent stylus brush these days.
Yeah, look, the dishwasher had a nice one, and
the best brush
Lyra cartridge make a little bottle of what they call SPT.
Yeah.
And a tiny little brush, and that's an excellent, very purified way of doing it. Don't use solvents. Don't use alcohol.
No.
Don't use anything. And I'm also not a fan of the little gooey,
little bowl of
pads.
Sticky stuff. Yeah.
Unless it's guaranteed to show no residue is left on the stylus after use. So there are some there that do that, but the way to use them is not by hand. It's to put it on a very stationary surface, gently lower the stylus into it, and gently lift the stylus out.
Yep.
Involuntary hand tremors and those sorts of things. You've got to remove any of those things when you're near a diamond.
Okay. All right.
Because you can wrench the diamond off its mount if you're not careful.
Yeah. I'm really annoyed I can't think of the other little tweaky question I had, but it may come back to me. But
I think we've covered 4, so we've got a.
Well, I think the cleaning thing was kind of there's a lot of contention, I guess, about cleaning, but let's move past that because, I think the record has to be clean. But, yeah, you've got to clean it in such a way that you don't actually make it worse. And I think hilariously, some YouTube videos are quite, they get a carbon fibre brush and they literally sweep all of the dust that's sitting on top of the grooves into the grooves sort of then announce that they've cleaned the record, which clearly is not a great plan. Quick question, Mark, so tracking force and its relationship to vertical tracking angle, and then in turn, what tracking force do you feel is ideal, or is that an arm-related thing? Because obviously most cartridges say 1.6 to 1.9 or something like that grams. But a lot of people go on about VTA. We haven't mentioned VTA and the whole, or maybe once it got alluded to. But when you
go through your alignment parameters, remember we're dealing with a vision for a perfect world, but we're living in an imperfect world.
Oh yes, we are.
So we say on the package that it says, say, 2 grams nominal, and the suspension system is classified at a certain setting, and again, if we were to measure that with a calibrated instrument, it might have a slight variance left or right of that nominal value.
Yeah.
So therefore, we do have sometimes the need to vary left or right of that nominal value on the other parameter in order to achieve a perfect or more perfect outcome. So I'm not a fan of running, say, a nominal value of 2 grams and pulling it back to 1 gram in the groove. I don't see that. I try to stick with the manufacturer's recommendations because they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they're recommending this value to seat the suspension at the right.
Yeah.
Now, for instance,
central position, I assume.
In the coil, in the engine. One of the difficulties is that if you increase mass or decrease mass, you can change the angle of the stylus in the groove, which is the stylus rake angle, which does have a dependency on the vertical tracking angle, VTA. The two are different. I won't go into full detail here, but you can look
So rake and VTA are two different things.
They're slightly different, but they are buddies. In the fact that adjusting the VTA, you'll change the way the stylus edges. If it's a fine edged stylus, will sit in the groove and its contact points. But if you go down that path, what's important, then you've got to head to the other parameters, which are azimuth and then finally zenith.
Crikey.
Now, zenith can only be measured under a microscope, and the cartridge manufacturer, you assume that it's 90 degrees to the cantilever when viewed from above. Yeah. However, you can have variances in that stylus on that zenith angle of, a poor example would be 15 degrees, 14, 15 degrees off the perfect zero.
Yeah, okay. Wow.
Now, manufacturers' tolerances are allowed, plus or minus, say, 3 degrees, which they publish, but 15 degrees is a horrid mismatch. So we're getting into the, in the upper echelons of expensive cartridges. If you have one of those misalignments, that needs to be factory corrected.
Okay.
Some factories are reticent to address that problem because they're buying a bucket of styluses from another manufacturer, and in that bucket, there's only a percentage that are perfect, and then the rest of them are left or right of that perfect line.
Yeah, okay.
So I'd say that within the realms of their manufacturing process, because remember, they don't make the diamond and they don't make the cantilever, they assemble it into the things they make. I have in the past mentioned that in a perfect world, you'd send your cartridge to an expert who would be able to knock off the diamond and re-glue it on perfectly.
Okay, yeah, all right. So actually, speaking of diamonds, do you have yourself a preferred cut or shape or
shape? Look, I think, you've got your replicants from Autofon, which are the most severe, but also the most accurate compared to the original cut, if the original cut was perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got your microlines, the Shibatas, and some of those more exotics. I would suggest the microline is my favourite because it's the most tolerant of the fine profiles. The most tolerant would be a conical. Elliptical is a little bit less forgiving, and then the microlines are less forgiving. But within that echelon, microlines, when they wear in a friendly fashion.
Okay. Right.
Replicants, when they wear faster because they're more severe.
Yep.
So you get a more glorious sound for a shorter period. If I'm paying that much for a cartridge, I'd like to strike a little bit of a balance, and the microlines for me are very good.
And why? I do like a microline, I have to say. I just from the sound quality point of view, I didn't realise they wore better. But so what? It's always it's the time, the forever question. How the hell does a diamond wear when it's just rubbing up against vinyl?
Well, how does a hard granite rock turn from a sharp pointed object to a round pebble under a screen?
I knew you'd have an answer. It takes a while, though, right?
It takes a while, but that it's just that atomic exchange between the two surfaces. So you definitely got heat and you've got pressure, and you polish. You get a smooth bit of A4 paper, right? You wouldn't think that you could abrade anything with it, and yet I can take that little bit of A4, beautiful white, perfect paper, and rub it on a car polished surface and cause scratches in that car polish.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. In fact, someone that was working for me once cleaned a piece of perspex for me with a piece of paper towel.
Wow.
Scratched the utter crap out of it. I said, what'd you do that for? Oh, I didn't think it'd be a problem. And I think he even dampened it. No, maybe not, but anyhow. It really scratched. Paper towel on Perspex is nasty. Another question jumped into my head. I have many questions. I think we've actually kind of covered it. So you like a microline, and so the analogy that you've made with the stone and the river stones or something is an easy one to grasp, but that indeed there's an issue there with wear, and I guess the heat thing is the other weird thing. I remember once demonstrating a turntable on a Friday afternoon, pretty close to 5 o'clock. They said, "Yep, love that. I'm going to take it." I walked out the front, sold them a turntable, and turned the lights off and went home. I came in on Monday morning. In fact, I think it was a long weekend, so maybe I came in on Tuesday morning. And at some time later that day, I walked out into the demo room, and there was this tick, 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 and I'm like, "Oh no!" I'd left the turntable in the run-out groove for three to 4 days.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, it clearly gets hot because there was a little twirl of vinyl.
Yeah.
The brain just failed to work. Swarf.
Yeah.
Little bit of vinyl swarf. A nice little, as if it had come off a lathe.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So how does that happen? I mean, I guess this diamond is literally cutting its own extra groove. So how much heating do you think happens when it's just one pass? Obviously, if it sits there for 4 days, it gets really hot. But
look, in some discussions, you don't play the record again for half an hour.
Okay.
To allow the matrix to re-assimilate, because the pressure is equivalent to tons of pressure on a surface, and the vinyl heats up and then it magically springs back. So if you rerun your diamond through that same point continuously, eventually the lag between the rebound and the heat build-up gets shorter, and then eventually you start gripping the material and pulling it away from its matrix, and you end up with that little bit of swarf after four days of continuous playing.
Yes, you do. I was horrified, and the stylus was destroyed. It obviously was coated in and it heated up, vinyl detritus. It was. I mean, I've only done it the once, but that was enough to. So it's actually an interesting exercise because I was genuinely. I was quite pleased with my efforts because I mean it was such a. I think I may have taken a photo. Such a beautiful piece of swarf. But anyhow, it was an OM5, so it was kind of irrelevant.
Oh, right.
I just dropped that in the bin and put another one on. No, an OM10 maybe OM10. Elliptical quality. So, look, I think we've covered a hell of a lot of ground, Mark. I mean, we haven't spoken probably as much about your turntable as people expected we were going to. It's kind of well known. Obviously, there's tons of information at Dohmann Audio. Helix 1 is the spectacularly top-of-the-range one, but Helix 2... Would you briefly describe the differences? I mean, only one arm board arrangement?
Sure. So what we did is we reduced the footprint, and it's one arm, but that arm board can be, with 4 screws, lifted off with the arm settings and cartridge settings all intact. And some of our customers, due to size constraints on their shelf, run a Helix 2, but have a number of arms that they just swap in and swap out.
Alrighty, yep.
As they desire. So it still has that flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
It's
still got the minus K.
Still got a minus K, but a smaller version of it.
Okay.
And it has a lot of similarities. Look, we had a recent review, Hi-Fi Plus magazine. We won the turntable cost no object category with the Helix 1.
Yeah.
then they reviewed the Helix 2 2 years later and gave it the turntable cost no object. They said if we didn't know about the Big Brother, this is all the turntable you'd ever need. So we haven't held back on the Helix 2. We've given it an absolute, everything we could. It's got the kitchen sink in it. I'm blessed with some amazing team members, including my co-directors, George Moritis and Jim Angelopoulos, both Melbourne boys.
You can tell that from their surnames.
Yeah. My nickname's Dohmannopoulos. It's got that family values, family culture.
Yep.
We've got, Jim brings some amazing talent to the business. He's a machine. Logistics. He's organised all my racking and shelving and support systems and my shipping and forklift and materials handling and storage and packaging, and so we've got this engine that is supporting the creative endeavours and keeping me as the mad inventor on the straight and narrow. And then George has the ability to communicate the language of the product to the market, plus contribute to the sonic development. And he throws questions at me, being a physicist. Hey, we need to look at this. I've been thinking about this. What do you think? Is this a problem? And that then gets me going and down a rabbit hole.
Right.
So it's not I started off on a kitchen bench as a DIY kid.
Yep.
And I launched the Helix, off the kitchen bench into Munich in 2015.
Yeah.
And then 2018, George and Jim came on board and said, you need professional help.
Well, yeah, but that was they were commenting on something else though, Mark.
I didn't get it, being slightly asty. And I just welcomed that, because I knew what good team spirit can build. And then we've got some guys who work with me closely in actually manufacturing and building in-house the assembled parts.
Yeah, we should point out that you make the turntable in Melbourne.
Yeah, so we've got, there's some bits that we buy from California and, motors from Switzerland, and, you can't make everything here.
No,
but,
of course not.
The precision parts, my bearings, Moorabbin Airport, one of the machine shops there, B&S Precision, those guys are just awesome. I've got, other machine shops, Ronnie Harrop, who's quite famous in engineering teams, Harrop's Engineering. Ron's one of my close friends and mentors in fabrication and machining and at the absolute high end. And other machine shops that we use locally. And we've built up in that Moorabbin, Cheltenham area, water jet cutting, laser cutting, surface finishing. We're even, occasionally we have to drive over to Airport West to buy our aluminium from an aircraft supplier there.
Yep.
And by the way, you can buy aluminium from, your local extrusion shop, and they've got acres of it on site.
Yep.
But no, we have to drive out to an airport supplier. They give me the certificates. It's Reynolds aluminium or Kaiser.
Yeah.
Comes from the USA. It's X-ray quality. It's way more expensive.
Yeah.
Than commercial. And there's a reason for that. We have to go to that. So, you look at the product costs and so on. There's a reason these costs are there, guys. It's not easy building it to that level of metallurgy.
Yeah, indeed. And as far as its structural qualities, but also getting the incredible finish that you've got is an art form as well, really. It's
and that's hard to do. Our plating shops in Ringwood, great guys. We've got a real good working relationship there. They have trained and they allocate one of their key staff members to look after the product through the process.
Okay, yeah.
You know, my surface finishing application is done by another guy who happens to be a guitar builder.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, you know what, he knows how to finish a guitar and build it, fine handwork. He knows how to apply a finish on a surface. This is the guy I want to work with. So we've got exclusive arrangement there, and
yep.
So it's finding those artisans.
Yep, absolutely.
And encouraging them to become part of the team, and it gives us a flexibility. Correspondingly, Lee Gray at Chiron Audio in Adelaide, we talk often on supply chain and who's a good supplier and who's doing your finishing, who's doing your leather work, blah, blah, blah. John DeSensi at OAD, hey, what metals are we using, and those sorts of things. So we actually share and collaborate in industry, because once you find a good supplier, you want them to stay in supply. So it doesn't do any harm of allowing another one of your compatriots in the industry to also do their work there, because it actually helps you.
Yeah, well, yes, you can get a volume of work and makes it worthwhile, I guess,
it builds
for the
up skill
subcontractor.
sets and so on, yeah. And the reason why we don't do it in-house is because if I was to buy a machine, just say had 3 or maybe 4 axes on it,
yep,
to do machine work, well, that would limit my designs to what I can make on my machine that I've just pumped so much money into.
Indeed.
Yeah.
The philosophy is that if my design needs a 4th, 5th or 6th axis to get it right, well, design away with no constraint.
Indeed.
So that you can then find who can do it with that.
Yes.
And, I've seen some very creative machine work done on 3-axis machines with jigs to hold things and so on, and people are very proud of that. But I'd rather find a supplier who had the DMG or something like that to do the amazing work in one setting.
Yes. Yeah.
Generating a lot of work for local manufacturers. That's what's impressive. And driving.
Yeah, well, some of the guys I've been with over 20 years. Machine shops that they have a bit of a giggle, about how fussy I am. And I mean, we looked at a recent example. I did a tour with somebody who wanted to have a look at a machine shop, and we went down to B&S Precision and walked through and showed them the CMM coordinate measuring machine, air-conditioned, temperature-controlled room for metrology. We showed them the grinding facilities there, the EDM wire cutting, their ability to handle hard materials. So, some of our bearing materials are very, very fine-grained steel alloys, quite rare, and they're difficult to work with.
Mm.
They're difficult to work with, difficult to treat, and get the precision required for hand-lapped assembly. I could buy a stainless steel shaft with a chrome finish on it and put it in a bronze bush.
Yeah.
Send it bronze bush. Yeah, I could do that, but we don't.
No. What sort of bushing do you use? It's
steel on steel.
Steel on steel. So it's just, like you say, hand-lapped, it's just perfect. Is that just enough? So for a film of oil only, is that the gist?
Oil film, we look at the Reynolds numbers. We try to get that film to form under the pressure.
Yep.
And we reduce the processional attributes that are inherent in any bearing. And we also then can breathe easy that the coefficient of expansion of metals, being the same metal in both the bearing post and the bearing shaft,
yes, yeah,
are identical, which means they expand at the same rate and they contract at the same rate.
Yep.
So it means I can reduce my annular gap in the as opposed to running a bronze steel combo.
Yeah, we've got to leave a little bit of room to move, so to speak.
Yeah, but not too much.
No,
not too little.
Yeah,
just right.
Goldilocks. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think we now have covered it, Mark. It's been an exciting story.
I think we only just started, guys.
Well, I'm pretending, right? I'm pretending. I mean, the reality.
Everybody's falling asleep.
No. Would you be interested in, if we only just started, would you be interested in having another podcast date, Mark?
Oh, always. As far as I'm concerned, spread the word for playing vinyl. Anything we can do to help, energise people to realise that it is a fun hobby, and that we're doing our best on our side to produce instruments to make music sound amazing from vinyl. I'm not anti-digital. I listen to a lot of digital music. It's just that when I really love something, if I can find it on vinyl, it just takes me further into nirvana than I can with other means.
Yeah, it is a bit special on those occasions. But that's what it's all about, isn't it? It turns playing a piece of music into an occasion. Right. Well, congratulations, Mark, on a lifetime of work, but in more recent years, creating this new brand, and obviously, achieving a multi-award-winning status, and a lot of very happy customers who enjoy as I have heard, the exceptional sound from records that you've managed to achieve. And
thank you, Andrew.
No, pleasure to have you on the show. Absolute pleasure. And you too, Brad. Thanks for having your input with, as I said at the start, probing questions. A pleasure. And we'll be not all of us will be back, but I'll be back again, and possibly Brad in a couple of weeks for the next episode. Thanks everybody for listening, and
thank you, Sound Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you,
Sonic Bard. All right, talk soon. Thanks everybody.
All right, guys. Cheers. Take care. Bye.
So you've made it to the end. Thank you for listening to episode 22 of Not an Audiophile, the podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, and you must have because you made it this far, can you please perhaps give us a 5-star review, if that's what they call it, on the platform that you prefer. So thanks again for listening. See you in the next episode.